Frida. The title page. Frida, by Jonah Winter, illustrated by Anna Wan, Arthur A. Levine Books, publisher. Frida enters the world. For little Frida, the world is Mexico. Her house is a blue house. It is in the town of Coyoacan. Frida's father is an artist and a photographer. He teaches her how to use a paintbrush. Frida's mother takes care of 6 daughters. Often she is tired. Often Frida is lonely, even though she has sisters. Enter stage left, Frida's imaginary friend. Her name is also Frida. They play games. All of a sudden, Frida falls very ill. She's in bed for months. There's something wrong with one of her legs. Even her imaginary friend can't cheer her. That's when Frida teaches herself how to draw. Drawing saves her from being sad. After Frida gets well, she still wants to make art, so she paints little paintings. They are copies of other paintings. Painting onto photographs is what Frida's father does for a living. He teaches her how to do this also. Frida also paints things she sees through a microscope. She loves to look at things very closely. At school, Frida studies science. She is bored. School is too easy. One day, Frida is riding the bus home from school. A horrible accident happens. A trolley runs into the bus. Frida almost dies. In the hospital, it is painting that saves her again. Painting is like her imaginary friend. It is there whenever she wants it. It keeps her company, and it keeps her from giving up hope. After the accident, life will never be the same for Frida. She will walk with a cane when she is able to walk at all. Her body will hurt always. But Frida doesn't cry or complain. Instead of crying, she paints pictures of herself crying. When she can't leave her bed, she paints in bed. When her whole torso is put in a cast, she paints on the cast. Nothing can stop Frida from painting. Because she's so often alone, unable to leave her house, she has to use her imagination. She paints what she sees in her heart, on top of what she sees with her eyes. It's almost like painting on photographs. She paints little magical scenes with words at the bottom. All over Mexico, people paint these kinds of scenes. Sometimes they are scenes of accidents with angels coming to the rescue. They are like prayers for people who are sick. They are called ex votos. Frida paints ex votos of herself when she is sick or in pain. Frida imitates no one in her style. Her paintings are like nothing else. In museums, people still look at them and weep and sigh and smile. She turns her pain into something beautiful. It is like a miracle. Viva Frida! Long live Frida! Author's note. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6 in 1907 in Coyoacan, Mexico, to Guillermo Kahlo and Matilda Calderon de Cayo. At age 7, she was stricken with polio, confined to bed for 9 months, and left with a shrunken right leg and a limp. At the age of 18, she was in a horrible bus accident that is too nightmarish to describe here. It is a miracle that she survived and that she was able to produce any art, considering the constant pain she was in throughout the rest of her life. That her paintings are among the most beautiful and original art ever created in the world and are reproduced in books, on posters, and even in advertisements is proof of her lasting popularity. Kahlo's popularity, which has been increasing steadily over the years since her death on July 13, 1954, began to grow when she married the world-renowned Mexican naturalist Diego Rivera in 1929. Their personalities were both so colorful, and their love for each other so intense, that their marriage remains one of the most famous of the 20th century. But it wasn't merely Kahlo's association with the celebrated Rivera that sparked an ongoing public fascination with her. Her painful story is so inspirational that she has become a role model for artists in general, who often must work under difficult conditions. She has specifically been an inspiration to women artists who have found in Kahlo's strength, courage, and pizzazz an example of how to thrive as a woman in an art world dominated by men.
Thank you, Karen, for reading this book today and sharing with us the life and work of Frida Kahlo. I was very inspired by her integrity and her struggle to overcome the obstacles in her life, to paint and to keep painting and to follow her heart, no matter how difficult it was. Today, we are going to think about that. Think about not just her struggle, but about the art that she gave us and shares with us, even today. She was very inspired by the colors and the world around her, the fanciful, colorful flowers and the various fruits in her home country of Mexico, the decorations in people's houses, the colorful clothing that they wore, the everyday life that swirled around her. I'm Barbara, and today we're going to take a journey with paint and paper and carrying the thoughts of Frida with us. We will need to begin today with some simple materials. You have some choices too that you'll need to make. First of all, though, a large piece of white paper. This is a rectangular one. It could be square. You'll need to choose the paint that you wish to use. Perhaps watercolor, acrylics, or tempera paints. These paints are all a little bit different. Watercolor clearly is more transparent. It's a little bit more difficult to work with because it will blend the colors quickly together, and they're not as bright sometimes as some of the other options. Acrylic is a very, very matte finish, very solid, rich and deep in color saturation. But they're expensive, and not very many of us have them in our homes. Tempera is sort of a paint in the middle. It's thicker than the watercolors, and it's opaque, which means it covers better than watercolor does. But it can be very messy to work with, and actually I think that's fun. So today, that's the first step, is choosing what materials, paint you're going to use. And except for watercolors, you'll need a paint tray. This is just a tray that I don't know, maybe some vegetables, something came on it at the grocery store. I tend to hang on to these things. I do a lot of art at home, and I'm always looking for something to use, and it's nice to have a bit of a stash. So because I'm working with the primary colors in white for my drawing today, painting, I have that ready. You'll also need a couple of different brushes, a smaller one and a little bit larger one. You'll need a drawing pencil, but not an eraser. Some people draw and they need to erase every time they think they make a mistake. I understand that, of course. But today we're not actually going to draw. We're going to sketch, and there's a difference. And we'll get to that in a minute. I also, when I go to work, especially with messy paints, make sure that I have some sort of an underpaper underneath my work to protect the table from paint or markers or any materials I'm using. You might have a plastic cloth, a large piece of heavy paper, or you might just wish to use some newspaper. It all works just fine. So, we are going to work today on a still life. A still life is a subject matter that we paint that is usually realistic. It's objects that don't move. So, not your dog, not a landscape outside, but usually a still life is something that you assemble together from objects in your house. Remembering what inspired Frida, the colors of the fruits and the flowers, I thought today we could work with fruit. So if you have some fruit around the house, you can set up your own still life. Let me give you an example. So I went through my refrigerator and the basket of things and came up with this. I didn't know so much about this squash. It's not exactly a colorful fruit, but it's what I have, and what I have is what I use. So I need to make a still life. I need to arrange these things, maybe some of them, no, but not necessarily all of them, into some kind of an arrangement. Well, No, two grouped together. Well, that's another arrangement, but nah, not yet. That's a little bit better. It's kind of grouped, but it's spread out enough that I think I could paint it. I don't know though, that's probably the ugliest banana ever. It's ready for banana bread any day. If you have flowers, or if you have objects, sometimes a bottle. Now, I wouldn't use this bottle because it has a label on it, but maybe I could find an interesting shaped piece of pottery or glass in my house that I could put as part of this still life. Still lifes come in a variety of different forms depending on what you arrange in front of you to paint. In this book are examples of still lifes. Here we have a painting of apples on a wooden table or bench. It's amazing realism. We won't be drawing realism like this, but I'm showing you these as an example of how a person might set up an arrangement of objects on a horizontal surface so that they could be taken as a beginning or a basis for a painting. Last week, I did a watercolor painting of a still life and had a very, very strikingly marvelous, delicious smelling pineapple. You can see the pineapple in this painting, along with a melon and some delicious looking peaches. Sometimes an artist will place a piece of cloth on top of the wooden table, or have other objects, like the greenery here, that accents and adds to the overall look of the final work. Another example of a still life. Now again, these are very realistic paintings, and they're done in oils. Oils is a type of paint that allows for very much precision, particularly with light and reflection. Today we'll be doing a little bit of light and reflection, but we don't expect our art to look like this. Here in this particular example, ceramic dishes highlight the design and arrangement. Well, I'm not sure I would really want to do a painting of fish, but if I had a lot and they were what I could use, I would. Here again, we see vegetables. We see some radishes on a tabletop. Things are arranged. Sometimes they look like they're very random, just sort of happen to be set down there without any thought for arrangement. And sometimes that's the best because it looks more natural. So I've set up my still life arrangement. It's in front of me, and I'm now going to sketch. Sketching isn't usually a part of the final artwork that we do. It's hidden often behind the paint or other materials we're using. So we don't tend to want to draw with hard straight lines. Instead, we want to have free movement of our arm. And so I'm looking, and over behind I see a melon. It has a little bit of a dip there. Before I draw all of the objects in front of me, I need to have a ground line. The ground line might be straight across. It could be behind these things, the back of a table. Or it might be one that sort of flows like that. You can also make one. But remember that some of the objects may stick up above the ground line and be in the background. But many of the objects will be on the table itself. So if I'm just going to draw some shapes here to give you an indication. If I drew a ground line and was at the exact, my eyes were in exact position where the ground line was where my eye was, right here. I was looking straight at it. Then almost all my objects would be sitting on top, like this. Something might be behind it, but it would probably be all the way to the bottom, because everything, in this case, can be seen on this table. This is a style of drawing that is very easy. Everything is sitting on this table line. However, actually, objects that sit on a table look differently than that. They are often below this horizon line, as we call it. Perspective drawing is something that gets really involved with that. We're not going to deal with that today. But watch and look carefully. See where your objects are in relation to this line that you have, this ground line. And everything up here is above it. Everything is above the tabletop or the surface. But it's slightly slanted, isn't it? Because you're not looking directly right there. Your eye is not at the table. You're not on your knees looking at the objects from the top of the table. You're actually looking down on them somewhat. So most of them, the bottoms of them, the edges of them, are going to be on the ground, regardless if they're sticking way up here or not. They're probably down here. And one thing may be behind another. This is hard to see, and it's particularly difficult sometimes to draw. It's often a good idea to practice this. I'm drawing upside down from you right now, so it's extra tricky for me. But you draw each of your fruits or flowers or objects that you have in front of you in this way. And normally the sketches are light. I'm pressing down very hard so that you can see it. But when you draw, you really want to keep your sketches light with a flowing motion. You kind of indicate your shape. You look at the object not for what the object is so much as for the shape it is. You look at its outline and you draw its outline. So if there's a circle, like an orange, you make that circle, but you sketch it lightly. It's easier if you must erase to sketch lightly than it is to have to erase a dark, heavy line. So we're going to stop for a moment here and let you finish your sketch of your still life. So in this case, I'm working with watercolors. I have done the outlines of my fruits here. This is my ground line behind, and you will notice that these fruits are sitting mostly on the table area. I kind of imagined it, and you're free to do that, of course. We're painting today the entire surface. There's no white leftover background. Of course, it's your art. You can do your art any way you wish. I'm almost done here. These were much better looking bananas. And I want to add just a little bit more shadow. You start, when you paint, by using the lighter colors first, generally. So I began with the yellows and the oranges. I did this beigeish brown of the pineapple and came in with a darker brush after it had dried a little. Here, the same thing. Oftentimes when we do a still life, there's a light source coming from one direction or another. I have it coming this way, and you can tell that by the way that the grapes here are darker below. So the light is overhead and coming this way. And because of that, I need to add some shadow here. But you begin with the lighter color and you move to the darker color. The first part that I did, though, was to do my background. In a watercolor, it's really important to try to get some of the background established first. Once you've done that, then you can begin to do the shapes in more detail. Sometimes adding just a little bit darker gives a sense of roundness, or using a drier brush adds that little bit of darkness to the red. When we want to add a shadow line, we tend to mix the color of the object itself, in this case it's purple, and we do that with a little bit of the brown mixing together. I tend to like to try things out on a bit of scrap paper to see if I get my color right. A little bit more purple, I think. There. And then, of course, I'm painting this from upside down a wee bit. If I find that's a little bit too much, I can go back in and soften that by rinsing out the brush and coming in this way. When you paint, it has to be enjoyable. Watercolors are a little less forgiving. In other words, it's much easier to make a mistake with them. Sometimes if that happens, you can just let it dry and paint over a little bit darker. If you want to encourage a little bit darker ground line underneath some of these fruits, then I'll just bring in a little bit darker color in here to show the shadow. Painting takes a lot of practice, but it is fun to do. And this is a challenging project to paint a still life like this because these objects are real. And whenever we want to represent something that's real, it's more difficult. We have high expectations sometimes, don't we? Higher than they need to be. I've always believed that no matter what we do, art is always right. It's right because we're doing it, not because it in itself is perfect. In fact, oftentimes it's not at all perfect, but that's okay. Look at how that color is bleeding out like that. It's a sense of the darkness underneath. If I wanted to do this with the yellow, with the lemon, to give it just a little bit of shadow, I would do the same thing with the yellow and the brown together. Maybe a little bit more yellow there. There we go. Now we're good. So enjoy working with your watercolors. A little bit more with the orange, I think. I took a very fine stippling brush and stippled the orange. You know how it has that sort of pocked surface. So I'm not quite done with this, but I think we're getting there. I might bring some more contrast up into these leaves. Watercolor is so fine to work with. I'm not quite done, but I'm getting there. If you're further inspired, you might want to do another type of still life without fruits or vegetables at all. But still, again, thinking about the vibrant colors that are possible with paint. This is tempera paint. It goes on very easily. You'll see, though, how sometimes with certain brushes, you'll get a brush texture, like I have done with the blue. It wasn't intentional, but much more matte down here with the brown. Again, covering the entire paper. Oh, but wait, I haven't finished, have I? So I chose 3 pieces of kitchenware, a couple of bottles and a ceramic pot. I put them in front of me on a tabletop, sketched them briefly, and painted. Now I would be finishing these and using the tempera paints. So I think I want to, after painting my ground, which in this case is the brown, and my background, which is the blue, I'm going to mix up the red and the yellow a little bit together. You notice on the palette I don't put a lot of paint. I can always put more on there, but I don't need to waste it. And so I'll continue to paint the next shape that I want to. The watercolor brushes are slightly different than the brushes that one uses for acrylics or for tempera. Notice they tend to be flat across the top. That's how you can cut in easily and make a clean straight line. Well, looks like this afternoon I've got my work cut out for me. So I'll be finishing this on my own. But this is another idea you can use. You can try. Painting is a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed our painting project today, and I hope you continue to paint. Put together many different still lifes. Paint everything around your house that you love and enjoy. You'll have a whole collection of wonderful art. And stay free and open about it, the way Frida was. She painted her own reality. She painted the world as she saw it. And that's what makes a lot of her art so magical. I'll see you again on another